All right, so next week, Tuesday, hopefully Wednesday if we can, and Thursday if your schedule's allowed, from like 2:15 to 3:45 or even later, you'll be in a group, you'll submit your paper, and we'll distribute the papers around, and you'll help grade your papers. Let me show you what the grading scheme that I use, partly, it's not entirely, um, but so what you'll be grading your papers for is first, did they show the actual payrolls? Did they compare that to expected payrolls? Did they talk about the prior number, which is important? Did they talk about the actual employment rate versus the expected? Did they talk about private payrolls, which is important? The participation rate's important. There are other things. You can't talk about prior numbers on any of this. The number of hours worked and the inflation number are interesting this time, so you might do that. Then something that talks about implications for the economies, we're looking for that. How did the S&P 500 do? How did, as far as its change and the percentage change? How did the 10-year Treasury do? Pick your adjectives real carefully. Remember on the negative 0.81%, I don't like, which is a normal change. I only put that in a couple weeks ago to clarify when a significant change is. So if you're between 1% and minus 1%, you can just say it fell 0.81%. You don't really need adjectives. But I think you do need an adjective on the 10-year Treasury. That's a pretty significant increase and a pretty significant drop in price. So that's the market. And then from the clarity standpoint, we're going to look at how many paragraphs you have, the length of the paragraphs. So one thing you should definitely do when you start looking at your draft is go in there and shorten the paragraphs. So if your longest paragraph is, say, 15, 16 lines long, it depends if you do 2 columns or 1 column. And one thing I like about the 2 columns on the paper is it does keep your paragraphs from getting too long, because in a 2-column paper, a long paragraph looks really, really long versus in a one, single column. So I look at that. A lot of bolded titles, good use of titles. Titles can really be your transition. You don't really have to say, now I'm going to talk about the S&P 500. You just say stock market reaction as a title, and that gives you the transaction. You don't have in the transition. You don't have to actually transition. You can say, okay, now I want to talk about how markets reacted to this. Let me start with the stock market. That's fine, but the title can do that for you. Bolding throughout really, really helps the key numbers. And then 10% of the paper is other economic data or other markets. So we'll have to look for that. So those are the 16 things we're going to look for. Not that if you get all those 16 things, you get 100 on the paper, but it certainly keep you from getting a 30 on the paper or 40 on the paper. I've had students that don't talk about the market at all. I don't really understand that, because I think it's clear in the paper discussion description, but they don't talk about it at all. A lot of students lose points on the bonds because they're just not comfortable how to talk about these. So you don't have to talk about the percentage change on the bond price. You do have to talk about the yield and the basis points change, but we don't usually say the 10-year Treasury fell 1.3%. That's just because no one owns that particular Treasury. That's just one particular Treasury. There's thousands of them out there. So we just use adjectives. It fell significantly, or fell a little bit, or dropped slightly, whatever term you're going to use. But we don't give the actual percentage, but we definitely get the percentage change on the S&P 500. All right, so next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, I'll assign you to a group. So I need your schedule those 3 days. I had someone today say that they're going to miss a day because of an exam. I don't know how someone can have an exam during our class, but if you have a conflict, work, or if you have a major something coming up, I need emails from everybody giving me your schedule. I'll put it in my email tomorrow so we can make sure. My biggest complaint is students do not respond. If you don't respond, I'll just put you into a group. This is a big part of your participation grade. So if I put you in a group, you can't do that group, then email me immediately and I'll try to move you to another group. But boy, it really irritates me. I'll get 40%, 60% of the class will respond and then 40% don't. And then I can't get stuff scheduled. So I need everybody's response by noon on Sunday so I can get all this set up. All right, any questions on that? So why do I do it this way? I just mentioned my security analysis class. They just had their first Zoom groups on their first paper, and about a fourth of the class hasn't even started. And their paper's due next week. And that's real scary because that's a hard paper. It's the hardest paper. It's 10 papers they have to write, and the first 2 are due next week. And so by putting this Zoom session, a lot of them were thanking me that, yeah, you put some fire under me. I got to get this done. So, so try to get into your habit of getting stuff done early. So you're not always last second. You can't do that in finance. Finance is a thinking career. You need time to think about what you're going to write, have some time to do a little extra research, and then you need the last few days just to clean it up, get it, get the transitions, get the wording right and all that. So you want a pretty good draft, very good draft for next week. All right, no questions on that? Looks like we got a really good group of people here, 25. That's not quite half the class, but all right. So let's talk. I think by now you've finished DC Cuts I. Is that correct? We've been through all of them. If you've gone through the videos through today, I think I finished DC Cuts. Can anybody name DC Cuts I at the top of your head without looking?
Like what each?
Yeah, just what they represent. You don't have to give me a definition.
Duration, convexity, credit, U.S. versus non-U.S.
Taxes.
What was it?
Taxes.
Taxes, structure, and inflation.
Inflation. There you got it. So I'm hoping y'all remember this 5 years from now. You may not believe me, but it's a really good list. If you get into a discussion with someone on fixed income and you have DC Cuts I, you will do well. Remember on credit, credit is both credit but also sector. I don't have them both in there, but credit is, do you want low quality or high quality, but it's also which sectors do you want to be in right now. Obviously, energy's had some struggles. Some of the consumer stocks have been struggling. So it's also a sector. So you almost have an extra S in there for credit and structure, credit and sector. All right, so let's look at the question from last week. I'm not going to give you a question this week because I want you to focus on your papers this week. But let's look at the question from last week. So last week we just had DCC. So your boss expects a recession. So if you expect a recession, rates are going to stay low and go even lower, and they're going to be very, very stable. So let's start with Treasury. Some of you were like, I'm not sure if I can get the overweight and underweight correctly. So the video I showed you on that should help a lot because I actually gave you a numeric example in Excel. So what you're going to do on the exam, let me just get you some practice here. So for Treasuries, there's 2 things with Treasuries. It's extremely important that on the exam you talk about 2 things. If you only talk about one thing, you only get 50% credit. So in Treasuries, the first thing is quality. So high quality is good in a recession. So you need to say something along those lines, or you want to move up in quality in a recession. Not in a recession, I should say going into, right? If you're already in the recession, then it's too late. So going into recession. So before the recession hits, that's when you want to move the quality. And the second thing is duration. Long duration is good as rates will be stable, be low and falling some. Now, low rates, you might not say that's so good, but remember long Treasuries, don't forget the shape of the yield curve. Remember that it's normally, this is from your 3013 class, normally upward sloping. Y'all remember that? Long-term treasuries generally have higher yields than short-term treasuries. That's certainly true today. And so what that means, if rates are going to stay the same, they're just going to stay where they are and not fall much more, then you're going to get a higher yield buying the long treasuries than you would if you bought the shorter-term treasuries. So long treasuries right now might get you 1%. Short treasuries might get you 0.1%. So you're getting an extra 90 basis points. That's pretty good. So duration's the other one. But so on treasuries, if rates are rising, you don't want long treasuries. But in this case, rates are low and are going to fall a little bit more, then you would certainly want to buy some long treasuries and lock in that yield. All right. So two things there. On tips, so I would say overweight with a caveat. And what's the caveat? I'm going to say see mortgage-backed. All right. So one thing to get into your notes, a lot of times firms are choosing between treasuries and mortgage-backs. When would you want treasuries? When would you want mortgage-backs? All right. Mortgage-backs do well when interest rates are very stable because they have a higher yield than treasuries. We'll get to that. All right. Questions up to there? Is that making sense? I wish I could see more of y'all. I'll keep switching around so I can see y'all. All right. Tips. I think most of y'all got tips correctly. What was the idea here on tips? Probably what? Low inflation, don't need, right? I think most of y'all said that. So I would underweight tips. And that's the only thing I have to talk about with tips is inflation. Usually in the scenario, I'll tell you whether or not I expect inflation or not. But if you're going into recession and rates are going to stay low, that just tells you inflation will not be an issue. It's pretty obvious there. There's no way interest rates are going to stay low if inflation jumps up, because bond investors just won't let that happen. All right, so there's tips. So let's talk mortgage backs. This is a pretty cool one. This is the most complicated one. Not every student gets this, so your goal is to get it so you can be one of those exceptional students. Mortgage backs, I would actually say in mortgage backs, overweight, you have stable interest rates. Thus, you want to what? Buy or sell convexity. Some of y'all got that right on the email. Anybody remember?
Sell convexity.
Sell convexity. That means, y'all know the difference between IE and EG. IE means that is, EG means for example. So IE, that is, buy mortgage-backed securities that have negative convexity, but why? Due to their higher yield over treasuries. Now, some of y'all made some really good comments, but just to understand the securities. So that's the only thing you have to say on mortgage-backed. We just need one thing, but just a couple things that y'all said in your notes. So a caveat to the caveat, rates falling some, will that cause refinancing? Probably not. Interest rates falling from 3% to 2.8%, people are probably not going to refinance for that. So people refinance when interest rates fall from 6% down to 4% or 3%. So rates not falling enough. All right, so if I said interest rates are falling dramatically, you could make that point that people are going to refinance more and you're going to be stuck with all this. But since they're only falling slightly, probably not going to be an issue. I think most people have already refinanced by now. And I doubt rates falling. You know, we just hit an all-time record low on mortgage rates this year. It's ridiculous how low they are. Just crazy, crazy. Most people are probably already refinanced. And I doubt anyone's sitting there going, you know, I've got a 3% mortgage. If I can get that down to 2.97, boy, I'm moving. I doubt there's anyone like that out there. The other thing people mentioned was the weak housing market. And unemployed that can't pay their mortgage. That's not an issue. All right, the way mortgage-backed securities work is there's no credit risk for the mortgage itself. Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, you're not exposed to the homeowner not being able to pay their mortgage. Someone else is taking that risk. So your only risk, these are these are very high quality bonds. I don't know, some of y'all might be a little confused. In 2008, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae essentially went insolvent and the government had to bail them out. But Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, they borrow money as institutions. That's not a mortgage-backed security, all right? So just be real careful on this. This is more than you need for this class, but I just want to comment on those. Now, if you said avoid mortgage-backs because the housing market's kind of weak, I would count off some, but I would give you some credit for at least, you know, thinking through the problem. But for Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, when they borrow money, yeah, that's a risky investment, no question. But when Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae put together mortgage-backed securities, you're not exposed to Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. You have a very high-quality portfolio that will pay you back. You know, they're just very high quality. They're not exactly Treasury substitutes, but they're considered to be very, very high-quality securities. Now, I know some of you are saying, well, in 2008, didn't we also see the subprime blowing up? And yeah, subprime blew up, but those were different types of securities. All right. The mortgage-backed securities, you know, they probably did sell off some in 2008 because of the housing crisis, but they still held up fairly well. I mean, it gets a little tough. We're talking about structured debt here, and it gets a little bit, but these tend to be very, very high-quality bonds. From my standpoint, I don't want you focused on credit on this. I just want you focused on convexity on mortgage-backed securities. All right, and specifically here, mortgage-backs are a good substitute for treasuries if you think rates are going to be stable. Why? See that little phrase there at the end is very, very important, because you get that higher yield over treasuries. Remember, if they had the exact same yield, you would just buy the treasuries, and then you don't have to worry about convexity, negative convexity at all. Triple B, this one's very straightforward. Two things here. We want to avoid the lower quality. So I would underweight. And so quality is the first to talk about here. The second thing you have to talk about is duration. Intermediate is okay, but longer term, better if rates are falling. All right, so there's two things there. There's actually three things you'll talk about here. Once I bring munis in, you'll talk about tax as well. I didn't give you any munis here, so you can't talk about the tax side. But here, some of y'all are asking about the quality of triple B. Triple B will probably not do well in a recession. Treasuries will probably have a higher return than triple Bs in a recession. So you're better off. Now, what about AAA? I won't give you AAA. Because AAA is almost a substitute for long treasuries, and it's hard to say how they would do in a recession, and there's not many of them left anyway. But triple B, 95% of the time, they will underperform treasuries. You're much better off buying treasuries than buying triple B securities if you expect a recession. All right, so there's three things under there, but we only had two in this one. And in high yield, some of y'all got confused on high yield. Remember high yield? These are very low quality bonds. So the only thing you have to talk about in high yield is quality. So what do we want to do here? You want the underweight. You want less of them due to expected recession. All right. So we're just practicing, kind of getting our feet wet here a little bit. In 2 weeks, we'll get much more into this as we practice. We'll actually have a Zoom session to practice this in groups in a couple of weeks, so you can really get ready for the exam and make sure you understand this. I did it in the videos as well. The next few videos, you'll see some more examples of this, full-flown examples. You have to add in stocks, you have to add in real estate and commodities and other things as well, but we're getting most of the bonds here. So I covered everything on the bonds except for municipal bonds. And the only thing we do with municipal bonds is we compare them to corporates and decide from a tax standpoint which we prefer. But we've covered everything related to bonds, and then you'll see how we do the stocks in a couple of weeks, but I just want to get you some practice. What we'll do for the Zoom sessions practicing for the exam is I'll actually give you a prior exam question, and you'll answer it, and we'll be in smaller groups, and we'll actually grade your answer to the exam in those smaller groups so you can see how you do. And I'll ask each group to give me one volunteer to let me grade theirs. if they have enough guts, let me grade them and let the whole class see theirs. I usually have someone volunteer. We'll see.
Sir,
Uh-huh.
so like, how is the exam going to be? Like, is it like a Zoom exam? How?
Okay, my idea right now is open book. I don't want to do open book, but I really don't want to use, some of y'all use the, I forget the name of it, protocol or something. I forget what it's called.
Proctorio.
Proctorio, yeah, it's a terrible name, but we're thinking about it, but last semester I did it as open book, and the grade average was exactly the same as the previous closed book exam I gave, so it's pretty amazing. I think students think it's open book, so I don't have to study, and on this exam that will kill you. You'll be a disaster. So what I actually do, if I do it open book, what I'll do is I'll give you the exam right at 2:30, and you'll have 30 minutes to answer it, and you must submit it in those 30 minutes. So there's time pressure. So you got to know it. That's why you got to study and know it in advance. You can't just be looking stuff up. If you don't turn it in on time, you don't get credit. So it's time pressured. So that's the way I'll work it. I know students last semester said, man, that was really stressful. I mean, yeah, it is stressful. If you didn't study, if you studied, it should be, you don't even need to look at your notes. You just answer it. I love this question though, man. If you understand this question, you will ace your interviews. I will assure you. This is an exam question. The class usually does much worse on this question than on the first question. And the ones who get this right, I can just tell they're understanding what we're talking about in this class. So it's pretty good. And I always ask students, after the exam, how would you have done on this question 2 months ago? And most of them say, I would have gotten a 0. I don't know any of this stuff. And now they're, at least they're getting a 60 or 70, and some are getting 80s and 90s. So it's starting to sink in, but you got to practice. There's examples out there in the videos for the class that you can get some practice. And I would actually recommend, after you do the first one or the second one, I forget how many I give you, but after you do the first one, the next video that I do one, you might pause it and you might answer the question yourself, and then watch me answer the question in the video and just see how much you're getting it. But this is the key. This is finance. It's not a textbook. It's not memorizing stuff you're going to forget 2 weeks later. You need to know this 5 years from now. Everybody in finance knows this stuff. So you might as well learn it now, right? Why learn it and forget it and have to relearn it again? Just learn it now. This is really critical stuff. Right, any other questions on this? So I didn't grade your submissions to see how well you did. I just looked to see if you actually tried and put some thought into it. But I do want y'all getting better and better and better at this. So.
All right. Oh, and I sent the email to
M-A-H-L-E-R?
Yep, that's the right email.
Yeah, Mahler 6 is one of the greatest pieces of music ever written in the history of music. Yeah, that's my email. I like to advertise my favorite composers on my emails. Yeah, so no question today, but we'll see. Next week I might do one where I email it out to y'all and y'all can submit if you want to and get some practice. I don't know if y'all like more practice on this kind of thing. Well, we haven't gotten to the stocks yet, but on the stocks, you'll see it's a little tricky on the stock. In fact, on the stocks is where most people lose most of their points. But you can see key to this question is on treasuries, there's 2 things, quality and duration. On stocks, there's 3 things. There's capitalization, beta, and style. And you have to cover all of those. So when we get the stocks, and I'll talk about this in the video, if I have small cap value stocks and you just say underweight small cap value stocks, I don't know if you say underweight them because they're small cap or if you're saying underweight them because they're value stocks. You need to on the exam say, I want to underweight them first because they're small cap and we prefer large cap in a recession. Secondly, I want to underweight them because they're value stocks and we prefer growth stocks in a recession. So you got to get both of those in your answer. If all you say is underweight small cap value because it's a recession, you only get 50% to your credit. So you're going to lose half your points. So, and why am I so picky? Because I want you, in an interview, you need to be able to say that. What do you think about small cap value right now? Well, I'm expecting a recession You sure don't want small cap in recession. You want to move up to larger cap and avoid stocks overall. And you sure don't want value stocks. Those are low quality stocks. You want growth stocks. Those are high quality stocks. You need to be able to understand that there's more than one thing in that asset class. We'll get some practice on that before the exam. But that really is where people miss most of their points, is they put one thing down when there's really two things in the asset. All right, anything else? Any questions?
Yeah, Professor.
Uh-huh.
So when choosing to either underweight or overweight mortgage-backed securities, is it more of a matter on whether interest rates are rising or falling, or is it more of if they're stable or volatile?
It's stability. If they're stable, they might rise or fall, but not very much. So it's unlikely to have that much impact on them. So it really does come down. Mortgage-backed pay that extra yield because of their negative convexity. And you get to keep that extra yield as long as interest rates aren't very volatile. So really, it's a play to get that extra yield on the mortgage-backed security. Remember, it gives you essentially that call premium. And that call premium you get to keep as long as interest rates are not really volatile. So it really does come down to convexity. I'm not going to tell you, I probably won't give you a scenario. Interest rates fall a lot and then they're stable. That would be a strange scenario. Usually if interest rates are rising or falling a lot, they're volatile. That's just, those two things go together. But I am on the exam, you may not get the answer how I'm thinking about it. As long as you're logical and you've thought through it and it makes sense, I might disagree with you, but I'll give you full credit. As long as you. So it's not a matter of getting exactly the answer I'm looking for. There are other answers that make sense, and I've always given students full credit, even though I disagree with their answer, because they thought through it. I mean, like here on the mortgage-backed, someone said, well, rates are falling, I'm worried about more refinancing. I probably would have given them full credit. But I would answer it completely. You say, generally you want to sell convexity when rates are stable. However, given they're going to fall some, I'm worried about refinancing. Therefore, I think I'll underweight them and stick with treasuries. I'll give you full credit for an answer like that. Just make sure you put it in, completely explain your rationale and that it's consistent with this. Where you lose points is you say, wow, rates are rising, I want to lengthen duration. That's absolutely wrong. You say that in an interview, they won't talk to you anymore. So rates are rising, you always want to shorten duration. Rates are falling, you want to lengthen duration. Those are things that they're absolute in finance. But there's other things that are a little bit grayer and a little shakier. All right, any other questions? Did y'all get a snip picture of this? Because I want to click off of stop sharing. You may need it. Can y'all snip that fast? I'm not hearing any no's, so I'm going to stop sharing. Usually I stop sharing and then people go, wait. So, all right, so I'm done. Y'all can get off. I'll stay on if y'all have any questions, but we're officially done. So if you want to get off, you're free to get off.